I happened upon him giving a presentation at Seattle Audubon in January, and I've been waiting all these months so I could hear more from him because he's so enthusiastic, knowledgeable. Uh, he has been teaching courses on topics from birds, butterflies, moths, and the natural world for a variety of groups. He does collaboration with the Forest Service, works with also the zoo, and has put his expertise to work for all of them. He has a degree, a bachelor's degree of education and resource management from the UW, and his master's degree in environmental education from Western Washington University. And no further ado, this is David. He could tell you what he was up doing this morning. Thanks.
Not quite this morning, maybe about 2 p.m. or so. I've been doing some research on the Mountain Loop Highway for the past 4 years. And this is me today, impatiently waiting for butterfly season to start. The main road still has about a foot of snow on it near the Big Four ice caves. So it's going to be a few weeks until things really get going over there. But we're not here to talk about the Mountain Loop Highway, though that may be a future presentation for Washington Native Plant Society. Instead, I'm going to talk about moths tonight. You're all a bunch of plant folks. We've got lots of birders out there. Butterflies have made their way into everyone's minds. And I say, why not moths? They're certainly a hell of a lot of fun. So first off, usually I get the question, especially with these intro classes, okay, well, what's the difference between a butterfly and a moth? So this is the most recent interpretation based on genetic work of the relationships, the taxonomy of all of our, let's see, I'm trying to move my bar here a little bit so I can even see my own screen. Okay. Basically, this is the taxonomic tree of Lepidoptera. So Lepidoptera being butterflies and moths, being Latin for scaly wing. And you can see, Cheryl, can you let me know, do you see my cursor?
I do.
Good, okay. So you see right here, this teal section here, those are the butterflies. Everything else are moths. And so what is the one interpretation we can take from this is that butterflies are moths. They're just moths that are doing things a little bit differently. They've traded in some of their sense of smell for better eyesight. They might sport more brilliant colors on average, but you'll see some moths in here that will completely knock your socks off, that'll compete with butterflies in their bedazzling dress. So butterflies, what is the difference? Well, probably the best one is going to be their antenna. Now, this, of course, requires you to get a very good look at the creature, which sometimes when it's just fluttering by, it's not going to let you do. But butterflies, by and large, have clubbed antennae, at least in temperate regions, whereas moths are going to have a lot of different kinds of antennae. So you have feathery antennae. You have ones that are called club-like, like on the Sphinx Moth. I prefer saw or something like that because we already have the butterflies are called clubbed. Or we have these filiform or just simple antennae. They're just little threads. They're not clubbed, not ornamented in any real way. All those different ways, all those different antennae on moths. For the feather ones, it actually becomes fairly easy to tell which one's the male and which one's the female. She's the one who releases her perfume, her scent, her pheromones, and it's his job to find her. And so the more surface area that those antennae take up, the more likely he's able to detect her pheromones. So female down there at the bottom right, and male at the top left. We'll talk about this species a little later, though. So we got people into butterflies. Why not moths? Why are people not into moths? Well, first of all, there's a lot of them. We've got approximately 160,000 species of moths worldwide to date. There's a lot still to be discovered compared to about 20,000 or so butterflies. You shrink that down to North America, we got 11,000 species of moths in North America compared to only 750 species of butterflies. And in Washington, we have over 3,000, well, I should say Pacific Northwest, we have 3,000 species in the Pacific Northwest, only about 150 butterflies in Washington. So you start to see 150 butterflies in Washington, that's a number I can wrap my head around. 3,000 species of moths. I can't even begin to scratch the surface. On top of that, in contrast to many of the moths I'm going to show you tonight, a lot of them are difficult to identify. You have a lot of moths that are some shade of grays, browns, which is a good thing. They've mastered camouflage. It helps them survive birds. They've mastered it. They're good at it. The majority of them fly at night. It's really easy to get into birds. It's really easy to get into butterflies when they're flying during the day, when you're awake. When things are flying at night, you need some special equipment to see them, to bring them to you, which we'll discuss a little later. And lastly, resources for moths are few, but they are increasing, especially online resources. But hopefully one day, I'm working on an intro guide to moths of the Pacific Northwest, subtitled "A Guide to the Common, Widespread, and Distinctive Species." So I went through all 3,000 species of moths, or at least the ones that are listed. And I asked myself, okay, is this species common enough that the average person living in the Pacific Northwest can see them? Is it widespread enough? I don't want to have something that's common, but only like in the southwest corner of the Pacific Northwest. I want it to be widespread so that the average person can expect to see it. And lastly, is it distinctive? So I came up with a list of about 350 moths. So 350 out of 3,000, about 10%. That's a good number to start with. So working on that, it's kind of been put on pause. I'm now training to be a high school biology teacher. So this has been put on the back burner for right now, but still looking for a publisher, mostly already written. Anyway, back to moths, back to other stuff. So I want to bedazzle you with a little bit of the amazing diversity that is moths, because between you and me, butterflies are kind of boring. I mean, they are only one clade within this giant realm of Lepidoptera. So you would expect the rest of the moths to sport quite a bit of differences in their life history, the way they do things. So here are just a few examples of how the different ways that moths interact with their environment, exploit resources. So here is Amidria Efrentella, a tiny little moth that feeds on basically the decaying plant matter and the stored plant matter in the nests of mountain beavers. We have the four-spotted yellowneck. We have the meal moth, which I find to be an amazing moth, unless you've ever found it in your pecans or something like that. They feed on stored grain, nuts, all that kind of stuff, hay. So farmers don't really like them too much, but you'll find them in birds' nests, beehives, all kinds of stuff. But I always love when they sit. They got this little curl to the tail when they sit. That is an introduced one, not a native one though. So I think it's fairly pretty. It's definitely in my guide, but it can be a headache for a lot of folks. So these are all detritivores, ones that are going to recycle dead or decaying plant matter into basically fertilizer for live plants. Have you ever been walking along and you see these little mines in the leaves? Possibly a moth. There are other insects that do this as well, but we have some small moths that the larvae are so small they can actually fit in between the tissues of the leaf. Great protection, really. And if you know your plants, and apparently if you pay really close attention to the pattern, you can actually tell what species it is just by the pattern. You don't have to raise it to the adult moth. These are often very, very tiny moths though. So we have the common aspen leaf miner, and this one does not have a common name, although you can see that Latin name Gaultheriella. So that's a miner on Salao. You could probably just call it the Salao miner if you wanted to. We have borers. We have a number of moths that burrow into their host as larvae. So you might have this big, chunky, I never know how to pronounce this, Prionoxystis robinae, the carpenter worm moth, whose larvae bore into various hardwood species and may spend 2 to 4 years in the larval stage, because wood is not that nutritionally valuable only to emerge to find each other. They don't even have a mouth. After 2 to 4 years of maturing into adult, they barely live more than a week. That's it. Leading a lot of people to ask, well, what's the point of all that? To make more caterpillars, to make more moths. One of my favorite families, if I had to specialize on any particular moth family, I might specialize on the Societidae. These are the wasp moths, or they're called clearwing moths. I prefer the bee moths or the wasp moths because they are insanely good mimics of various stinging insects. And this one, the raspberry crown borer, may explain why certain shoots of your raspberries may have failed. She'll lay her eggs on there and the larva will bore into the shoot and kill that particular stalk. It might be, you might have this silver spotted ghost moth show up, maybe not over here, but out in Carl's neck of the woods perhaps, in these two lovely color forms. They are also borers. I believe they bore into the roots of their hosts. But one of my favorites, the Petrophila. Petrophila, what a name. Water lover. These are aquatic larvae that feed on algae. So the Lepidoptera, the butterflies and moths, their closest relatives are the Trichoptera, the caddisflies, and they have aquatic larvae. And so Trichoptera and Lepidoptera shared a common ancestor. And Petrophila says, no, we're going to go back to that aquatic lifestyle. So that is a really, really cool one. I got in 2018 through 2019, I lived in Walla Walla, and right next to the Walla Walla River, I got real acquainted with these guys. I'd set out my bucket traps and they'd be filled with Petrophila. So very cool little moth there, very unique. So that's just a quick introduction into some. There's a lot of other methods too. We have moths across the world that are carnivorous, ones that are active predators. But I'm just throwing you a quick sampling here, mostly in the interest of time. But mostly, I want to show you some commonly encountered caterpillars that you guys may come across, because as plant observers, you're actually more likely to see moths than, say, I am, because I'm usually out during the day with my net. I'm looking for butterflies. I'm looking for day-flying moths. I'm looking for movement. And not often am I actually looking carefully in the plants for caterpillars. Whereas as plant observers, you guys are probably more apt to look close. So I want to show you some of the commonly encountered caterpillars and ones you can actually say, I know what that is. I totally know what that is. But it's quite a bit of fun because finding them can be a challenge. Number one, they are masters of camouflage, or some of them are masters of camouflage, either like this Schizura, I think. We cover that later. Looking like maybe a dying edge of a leaf. You have this one, I don't think it was ever actually identified, but some kind of geometrid, one of the inchworms. By the way, inchworm, if you ever find an inchworm, that's a moth. All inchworms are moths, but not all moths are inchworms, all right? Just play with that one. But look how well that looks like that cedar. Blends in super well. Or you might have ones that affix themselves, just plaster themselves to the bark. They look like bark. So these are likely Catocula caterpillars, the underwings. Have yet to find one for myself, actually. Here's one I only noticed because I literally ran into it, another geometrid caterpillar. I did not keep this one to see what it turned into, so I don't know exactly what it is. I just know it's a geometrid because it's an inchworm. Although I should mention there are other inchworms in other families, but the geometrids are the main inchworms, or they're the most of the inchworms are geometrids, but doing its best as a stick mimic there. One of my favorite moths, the maple spanworm moth, not only does a great twig impression as a caterpillar, but then it does a great maple leaf impression when it flies in September. Even going so far as to, when you disturb it, it just kind of falls to the floor like a stiff maple leaf. But this is the one I get the most questions about when they say, okay, well, commonly encountered caterpillars. They know the one they want to ask me about. and it's the tent caterpillar. So a lot of you know the tent caterpillars as the caterpillars, but how many of you know actually the moth that this turns into? And this is where I actually hate Zoom meetings, because I like to see hands, I like to see smiles, nods, all that kind of stuff, and I can't see any of you right now, so hopefully this will all be over soon. But this is what they turn into. Maybe not, you know, the most dramatic or striking of moths, but I think they're cute, handsome. I call them flying teddy bears with antenna. So this is the Western tent caterpillar, Malachisoma californicum. They're considered a pest, but I would consider them more of an aesthetic pest. Basically, if the tree or the shrub that they're feeding on is healthy, it's likely to survive many rounds of defoliation by these guys. Now, if it's more stressed, let's say if it has a fungal infection, if it's drought stressed, then it might finally succumb. This might be like, you know, just the straw that broke the tree's back, so to speak. They do oscillate, so we'll have outbreak years, and then followed by years where we just see none. This is another one where the adults don't feed. They just find each other, mate, and lay eggs. So you got the 3 males there on the left, and that's the female on the right. Quite a bit brighter than the males. Oh, so I am noticing that in the chat there are some questions. I don't think we mentioned this, but if you have any questions, we're gonna go over these more at the end. So forgive me if you're asking questions and I'm not answering them right away. We will answer them toward the end. But these are not the only tent caterpillars in the Pacific Northwest, although they are the only ones to make tents. There are the Western tent caterpillars relatives. You have the forest tent caterpillar, which doesn't make a tent, but they'll still often roost in groups. And then we have the Pacific tent caterpillar. This is one of those really weird ones where like the adults are real drab, but those caterpillars are striking. One of the ways I know dystria is look at these footprints on its back, walking toward the head. Really good sign to look for. And that constrictum is just the most gorgeous shade of blue and orange. Primarily oak feeders, these ones are. You got to go down to like Klickitat County or something like that to get them, and then they become way more common into Oregon and California. We have oaks on the islands, but I don't think constrictum's been found there yet. But everyone's favorite caterpillar. You might just call it the woolly bear. Technically, it's the banded woolly bear, but if you want to call it by the moth's name, it's the Isabella tiger moth. And this is what it turns into. Should have included a picture of the hind wings. It has some salmon pink hind wings, and some bright red legs. So a very cool moth, very cool caterpillar, and it's a really good introduction into this subfamily of moths, the woolly bears, the subfamily Artiinae. They used to be the Artiidae, but then they were demoted to subfamily based on genetic evidence. But look at those fuzzy things. So they don't really seem to be trying to hide, do they? They're definitely not camouflaged. I mean, you think those hairs, you know, wouldn't have much to worry about with those hairs. I wouldn't really feel good going down a bird's throat. But the moths they turn into are striking as well. And the top right one, the Rashman's tiger moth, is a day flyer, as big as any butterfly. I'll often get emails asking, hey, I think I found a new species of butterfly. It's not in any of the butterfly guides. I know it's a day flying moth, man. So one thing that this family, well, we'll go over that in a little bit. But keep in mind, these moths are not trying to hide. And why? But one of my favorites of the woolly bears is the spotted tiger moth, mostly because it has so many different forms of caterpillars. Most common one that you'll find is going to be the one in the lower left there. But you'll have these different ones from different regions. Kenneth Strothkamp in 2015 did a nice little summary suggesting that there's different larval color forms based on ranges. Could this lead to subspecies, ecotypes, all this kind of stuff? But occasionally across the range, you'll have these white ones show up too. But so that's all the same one, the spotted tiger moth. Look for that at your light in July. And then the one that's not so hairy but totally stands out, the Cinnabar Moth. If you've ever seen this one before, this was introduced biocontrols. This one is not native. It was introduced, you can see that Latin name there, Jacobiae. It was introduced to control Tansy Ragwort. Not really doing that great a job, to be honest, but doesn't seem to be affecting, hasn't really jumped to other natives, or it's not displacing any native species. So I say, hey man, welcome to the list, especially something like that. So Tansy Ragwort, a very toxic plant, I think causes kidney failure, liver failure in livestock. All these other moths, caterpillars, brightly colored, they are demonstrating aposematism. And so this was one that, this is a beetle that I found shortly after learning about aposematism as a youth. And whenever I find something of interest, one of my strategies is usually to poke it. I find that usually answers a lot of questions or raises more questions. And so I found this beetle and I said, ooh, I bet you that's aposematic. It's not trying to hide at all. And I poked it and it did this. It started bleeding from its joints. And this is called a reflex bleeding. So that if a predator were to pick up this beetle, it might reflex bleed a little bit so the predator could get that nasty taste in their mouth and go, ah, and spit it out. Maybe the beetle will live for another day. These moths, the archaeids, are doing the exact same thing. They are advertising their unpalatability or their toxicity that they've either incorporated from plants or that they made themselves. That's what's really interesting. I would love to do more research or see if someone's done research on this family, because this family will feed on just about any herbaceous plant in your yard. Clover, dandelion, thistles, plantain. There's so many I can't keep track. And yet these plants are all from different groups. They likely have different chemical compounds for defenses. And yet these ones are able to override all of them. And then my question is, well, are they incorporating those plants' compounds into themselves to make themselves unpalatable, and they're advertising that? Or can they manufacture it themselves and it's independent of their plant choice? I don't know yet. I haven't found the research. But check this out. I caught a Cinnabar moth. There it is in my forceps, and it's reflex bleeding. It does the same thing. And this is your classic aposematic, we'll say lep, your butterfly, your monarch with its look-alike, the viceroy there, in case any of you have ever seen those. But that's they ingest glycosides from their milkweed hosts and makes them, at the very least, very, very bitter, very unpalatable to their predators. Going back to my advice on poking things, this might be a caterpillar you don't want to poke. So first off, it's loaded with spines. You can immediately think, okay, a bird's not going to want to eat that. On top of that, those spines are urticating, so giving you a similar sensation as stinging nettle. So they are very well defended caterpillars, but look at the moths they turn into. Not small moths either. Like, that's my hand that the Eglanterina, the elegant sheep moth, is sitting on. I had one butterfly trip where we found these. There was a 5-year-old on our trip, and she said that should be called the rainbow sherbet moth, and I agreed with her 100%. These are all day-flying moths, generally about 3 inches or so. Easily mistaken for butterflies, but you look at those feathery antennae, so those are moths. You have Hemiluca hera, which is a specialist on sagebrush and will fly in August in the sage steppe. We don't have very many records of these. I suspect they're actually far more common than we think, but how many people want to go out in sage steppe in August? It's kind of hot. And then we have Hemiluca nuttallii, which is, I think, antelope brush, bitter brush, couple of the shrubs in that sagebrush ponderosa pine interface that that borders the sage steppe. Eglantrina can be found on numerous rosaceous plants. They'll be found in the prairies, Willamette Valley, and then on the eastern slopes and the foothills of various mountain ranges. Not really in our Western Washington forests, sad to say. But if you go down to the Puget Prairies, you'll find them in July or August. And take a look at these funky ones. Another one you would suspect, probably doesn't taste too good swallowing. And I've heard rumors that these also have very irritating hairs, but I've definitely poked these, and I haven't experienced that myself. But these are the Tussock Moths, and these actually are, at least the bottom one there, the Douglas fir Tussock Moth. That can be a rather serious forest pest during some outbreak years. Look at those big old feathery antennae, though. Orgaia antigua is it's a day flyer of this group. Otherwise, these guys are primarily nocturnal, but that one I'll find flying with woodland skippers in August and September. And I'm thinking I'm finding a skipper catch that one. Yep, one of our day flying moths. You'll find these wander around quite a bit, and it's fairly easy to raise them if you want. The females are flightless, which is really cool. You'll have this big old plump girl pop out with these little stubby wings. So the next time you see one of these caterpillars, take it home and try to raise it. See if you can get a female. And then what you do is you put her in a jar with maybe some mesh and see how many males will come to her. Because once again, she's releasing pheromone, and you're going to have a whole bunch of males on the outside of that jar trying to get at her. Then you can play matchmaker. All right. Maybe not as dramatic of caterpillars as far as fashion is concerned, but dramatic in their, I was right about the genera. Yes, Schizera, or however you want to pronounce that. We have the unicorn caterpillar moth, which is a very fitting name with that little horn there. These are the guys that try to look like a dying edge of a leaf or a nibbled edge of a leaf, so they're hiding in plain sight, looking like something they are not. We have the morning glory prominent, which is actually a terrible name because it feeds on numerous different plants, and morning glory is not mentioned as one of them, so I have no idea how it got that name. Maybe an ancient rumored host, I don't know, but not in any of our records. So I first experienced this moth on the edge of this house that we were staying in, and I poked it. I poke things. And it flew. And I was blown away yet again, not only in the caterpillar stage are they master hiders in plain sight, but this one flew into a bush, I followed it, and there it repositions itself almost like a broken twig, hiding in plain sight. Absolutely stunning. But then, of course, I get the question, okay, well, what about the big caterpillars I see? The big ones that look like it might be tasty to eat. So we have two different species of giant silk moths in Washington, or at least commonly. You'll have the one with the more colorful nubbins up there. That is the Ceanothus silk moth. More a species of eastern Washington, although it does pick up again in the San Juan Islands and foothills of the Olympics. But over here, it's here, but it's much, much rarer. And then the other one, much more common, although I should say they're definitely not common by any means, the big old Polyphemus moth. That's got to hold our record for largest moth in Washington. And they'll feed on numerous different broadleaf trees, your maples, your alders. I raised 12 caterpillars of these one year on alders. Never again. They eat like steers. I had to make 2 trips a day to gather alder leaves for them, and they got beefy. They got big on alder. As stunning as these moths are, amazingly, another family that has no mouth. So they amass all this food, they make this big chunky caterpillar, and that's what the adult lives on, is all that fat that the caterpillar stored up. They may only live for 3 to 4 days, week at the most. Once again, the point, make more moths, make more caterpillars. Now, because of this, they have some of the most sensitive sense of smell in the animal kingdom. Those big feathery antennas of the male, can detect the female's pheromones in parts per billion, and he can track her from up to 5 miles away. So even though you might think that's quite a job to find a mate and lay eggs, they're usually done with all that within the first 48 hours. And that's it. They're just living life after that. The other big caterpillar you might find, especially in suburban Washington, is Smarenthus Cerissii, although this actually went under a taxonomic change. So our Smarenthus is now ophthalmica. I don't know if you native plant folks have any taxonomic changes. I'm sure your taxonomy is, you know, pretty well grounded and permanent, right? They'll turn into the Sphinx Moth that has it's kind of intimidating looking, big old wings, but then you once again poke it please, and it will reveal these bright pink hind wings with these blue eye spots, and this is where it gets its name, the one-eyed sphinx. It has both of its compound eyes, but it has one eye on each of the wing. There's a much less common relative, Paeonius exicata, that lives here, much more common eastern Washington, much more rare western Washington, where it doesn't have that pupil, and it's called the blinded sphinx. Good name. Also love that blue tail that the caterpillar is sporting. These are some of my favorites that I find when I'm walking through a wildflower meadow up in the Alpine, when I'm doing my butterfly surveys on the Mountain Loop Highway. You look on Fireweed and you're going to see a ton of these. These belong to two very special moths that I like that fly with the butterflies. They're both day-flying moths. Androloma, I always butcher this name, Maculacii or something like that. I like to call it the Dwarf Forester. And then you have the 6-spotted Forester down below. It even's got those little fake pollen sacs, maybe trying to look like a bee or something. I don't know. But they're cute little caterpillars. They're fun to raise. And once again, I get a lot of questions about these as far as, I can't find this butterfly in my butterfly book. It's a day-flying moth. So that's just a little very quick tour into some of the most common caterpillars you might run into in your plant strolls. But this is where I want your help. This is where native plant folks, because you guys are looking at plants so closely, you guys are going to find caterpillars that, you know, us fools chasing around butterflies and moths with our butterfly net, we're never going to see. It's embarrassing how many host plants of our moths are completely unknown. And some of them are forgivable. So this is a favorite of mine, Notodonta pacifica. This is a big moth, not quite as big as your Polyphemus, but you know, we're talking 3 inches or so. Quite handsome. But this is a rare large moth from mountain foothills. So we can be forgiven for not knowing the host of this because it's rare. It is rare and sporadic. And we've never found the caterpillar. We have suspicions of what its host might be based on the preferences of similar species, but who knows? It could be something completely different, but we haven't found it yet. Here are some more. So we're running through some more moths this time rather than caterpillars, that we don't know the host. Rigognosis interrupta. I call it the sine wave moth. That's been one of the fun projects of my field guide, is that there's a number of species that have no common name, and so I get to give them a common name. So I'm calling this one the sine wave moth. And then we have a Catoptria that is either, I've found 2 common names for it. It's either the 2-banded snout for these 2 gold bands, or it's the 3-spotted snout for these 3 windows that those bands create. So whichever you want works. We have Catoptria oregonica. I call it the mountain Catoptria. Maybe I need to find a new common name for that. Ooh, I have a hard time with that one. I find it in my hikes in the mountains. We don't know what any of these use. Now, once again, we might be forgiven. These are relatively small moths, and so therefore their caterpillars are probably also small. So we could be forgiven for overlooking small caterpillars, right? But then we have these. These aren't small moths. I mean, they're not big moths, but they're not small moths. And they're really common. And we have no idea what they eat. We have this one that I call the half moon thyoterid. My zoom bar is blocking my text up there. We have the grand rivulet, the black and white Udea, and the shieldback cutworm. All of them. Don't know. The shieldback cutworm, we have ideas as far as based on similar species and what they eat, but these are far too common for us to have that excuse. And since they're not small moths, we can't really give the excuse of, oh, well, they're small caterpillars. How are we supposed to know? So could it be that they're concealed? Could they be a borer? Could they be a tunneler? Could they be something like that? Could they be nocturnal? Could they be hiding during the day when we would be looking and they come out at night to feed? I really don't know. Why is it that these have been so elusive and yet other caterpillars are so easy to find? Even more embarrassing, butterflies, we know their hosts, or we know the vast majority of their hosts, and it makes sense. We can watch them fly during the day. So we get to watch them court, we get to watch them mate, we get to watch them lay eggs. Here are 2 day-flying moths. We don't know. We don't know what they lay their eggs on. The dark ribbon wave is particularly embarrassing because this is a common one. This is a common spring moth that I find puddling with butterflies. And so it's embarrassing that we don't know what the host is. We suspect that it's cherry or various rosaceous hosts for the dark ribbon wave, but we don't know. Once again, we can make some assumptions based on hosts of closely related species. So we have the sagebrush girdle moth, which I think is a little bit presumptuous. We do see it in sagebrush a lot. A relative uses sagebrush, and so we think, well, then it must use sagebrush too. So we're going to name it sagebrush girdle? Not until you prove it. Tholera americana, the white-webbed moth, is a bunch of its relatives feed on bunch grasses, so we suspect it does as well, but we're not going to know until we find it. Oh, the genus Euxoa. That genus gives me a headache, but here are some that are actually fairly distinct. We have over 120 species of Euxoa in the Pacific Northwest, and a lot of them are frustratingly similar. But these are called cutworms. A lot of the noctuid caterpillars are called cutworms, and they generally march around on ground level consuming various herbaceous plants. So it strikes me as odd that we just haven't run into any caterpillars. Is it maybe because we're lazy and we've actually found cutworm caterpillars, but we haven't taken them home? And if we take them home, we need to know what they're feeding on. That's where you guys come in. So at this point, I'm hoping you're looking at your screen going, okay, you've convinced me. I'm in. I'm raising caterpillars. We're looking at caterpillars, we're looking at moths, but how do we study them? How does one study moths? So first off, if you're going to take my advice, if you're going to join us and try to find out what the hosts are of all those unknown moths, there's 2 methods. There's the sweep method where you take your net and you brush it back and forth through the vegetation, and you're going to collect all kinds of insects doing this, but you're going to collect caterpillars. Now, the problem with this is, okay, I just brushed my net through a diverse meadow, and I found a caterpillar. What plant was that eating? So you might take a sample of each of these plants, maybe put it in the corner, in like different corners of a shoebox, and see which one the caterpillar hangs out on, and wherever there's frass, the fancy word for caterpillar poop, wherever a whole bunch of frass accumulates, hey, that's the host, and you can raise it and see what it turns into. Does it turn into something that was one of the unknowns, or does it mature into a moth that we do know, but maybe you found a new host for it? That's news as well. My other favorite method for caterpillar hunting is called the beating sheet, which is, you can make them at home pretty easily too. It could even just be a sheet you lay underneath a shrub or a tree. But then you take a stick and you whack those branches, and once again, whole bunch of insects in there are going to fall out from it onto the sheet. Let's see. I need to check the time real quick. I want to make sure that I'm not overstaying my welcome. Ooh, I need to hurry. Okay. But both of these are really good for finding caterpillars. And then you need to find out, and then you need to get good at raising caterpillars, which is a different challenge, and I'm not that good at it, and I am not the person to ask, but there are lots of resources online as far as how to raise caterpillars. I don't know if maybe I'm just a bit too involved. But this is my favorite way as far as studying moths, the light sheet. There are numerous ways to do this. So this is a fancy setup. This is an expensive setup, but man, does it work. You're using a mercury vapor bulb, which is the same bulb they use for street lamps. But it brings in moths from a distance. It brings in moths that, say, a porch bulb isn't going to bring in because it's not burning at as many different wavelengths. The problem with a mercury vapor bulb is it burns hot. And so you kind of have to be there, especially in case it rains, because one drop of rain will shatter that bulb. But man, does it work. But, so if you don't want to stay up all night looking at moths, there's an example of how many moths it can bring in. So if you don't want to stay up, you can use the bucket trap, which uses a black light. You connect it to an energy source like a battery, and the moths come in, they get tripped up, they fall into the funnel and into your bucket, and then you can open it up and see what you've caught in the morning. The well-rested moth watcher. And so these aren't prescripted setups. You have a number of different ways. So we have so Carl uses a de-electrified bug zapper. So he just pinches the component that would deliver the killing zap. And he's got a bucket there. He's got all of his egg crates that moths like to hang out on. I have a friend in Montana that she uses all these CFL blacklight bulbs on her porch, and they show up at right there. So it can be as simple or as complicated as you want. When I go out into the woods to light trap, since I'm out in the woods, I'm the only light out there, I just throw a white sheet, battery, black light, and they all come in. Real simple to set up and take down. So I would like to introduce you to Carl Barentine, one of our, what would we call him? Mother extraordinaire. So he's been doing, ever since he moved here, he's been keeping track of moths in his backyard through just sheer grit and commitment. So, for example, this is an older slide, but so for example, in one year he found 567 species in his backyard as of October 15, 2020. I think his total list for his yard is over 700. And when I tell people this, they think, oh, he must live in some magical place. And no, well, he does, but it's not super unique. I have a correspondence, Bob Scaffey from British Columbia. He has sent me, let's see, 1,662 records from his home in BC, but he's got over 500 moths in his yard so far, and it keeps growing. So I guarantee you, even if you're in suburbia, you've got at least 300 species of moths in your backyard. You just got to start setting out lights and finding them. One way we do, I heard you guys had a presentation by Doug Tallamy. That's great. So the great news is that gardening for moths is actually much easier than gardening for butterflies, because gardening for butterflies, they need very specific things, very specific plants, and so do moths. But the great news is that if it's a native plant, oh, there's a moth or two that feeds on it. So if you just increase the diversity of your plants, you're probably going to get more moths at your sheets. So this was a little bit of data from Bringing Nature Home by Douglas Tallamy, where he showed caterpillar biomass on native plants versus alien plants. So many more caterpillars on those native plants. And I use this in bird gardening presentations to show, hey, if you want more birds, you plant more stuff for bird food, the caterpillars. I'm going to run through these real quick just because we're running low on time, but number of online resources. Check out Pacific Northwest Moths. It is amazing. It's not exhaustive. There's plenty of families that are left out, but what is there is tremendous. This is a tremendous resource. Moth Photographers Group is another really good one. Bug Guide is a great online community. You can submit your photos, get them identified. Butterflies and Moths of North America. This is one where you can actually become a citizen scientist and help us with records and records, phenology, resources, whatever. Basically, you go down to get involved and submit a sighting. You submit your photo of the moth on your wall or the caterpillar or something like that. And if you're in Washington, yours truly will identify it for you, or as much as I can. Sometimes I can, so forgive me if I can. But that's where you can actually start contributing to our knowledge. All you need is a camera. And stuff like this is great because I can only cover so much ground. Carl can only cover so much ground. Lars Krabo, Marius Aurelian, Meryl Peterson, we can only cover so much ground when instead, all you need is a camera and a porch light. Think about how many more records we get now. So these citizen science projects really help in amassing data that, you know, us few individuals would never be able to by ourselves. Once again, as far as resources, hopefully soon my field guide will come. We'll see how that goes. So to end this really quick, this quick highlight reel of moths and why you should love them, I invite you with Carl's line, welcome to the dark side. I think that is all. I will take questions now.
Okay, we have quite a few questions. And if you want to stop sharing your slide, I have another slide I would like to share.
Okay, stop share.
Thank you. So you should be seeing a invitation to join WNPS. Can you see that, David?
I can see that, yes.
Okay, great. Or thank us with a donation. And we ask if you're ready for the next program. And our next program is on April 15th. It's called Flowering Invasive Plants and Native Pollinators. Is it an exotic buffet or a food desert? And it'll be presented by Sandra Gillespie. So I'm looking forward to that, and we hope you'll join us. Some of the questions are, first of all, at the very beginning, when you were bemoaning the Zoom meeting, Judith Broadhurst reminded us that the value of Zoom meetings, especially for people that don't live in big cities, is that it enables people to see a lot of stuff that they wouldn't ordinarily have a chance to. And I wanted to throw in that when we do go back to live presentations, we're working on ways to stream them so they will be available to people at more remote locations.
That is an important factor to consider. I did not mention that, but that is very true.
Yeah, it's opened the doors to a lot of different chapters to people that don't live near there. Margie Roth wanted to know if tent caterpillars have predators.
So they do. Oh boy, let's see. So I'm going to answer that question while trying to. There we go. Exit full screen. So there we go. I'm basically searching for an image. I might just have to describe it for lack of time. Oh, but it's such a good image though. But now, of course, I'm forgetting where to find it. Oh well. So they do have predators. The The yellow-billed cuckoo used to live in Washington, and it was actually one of the few birds that could actually stomach those hairy caterpillars. So when they had a good year, when the caterpillars had a good year, the cuckoos had a good year. But they've since been extirpated for unknown reasons from Washington. So that's unfortunate. But you have a number of what are called parasitoids, specifically tachnid flies, that lay their eggs on the caterpillar, and then their larvae consume the caterpillar alive. It's brutally beautiful, but it works. And then, of course, as they get more and more dense, viruses spread very easily between them. So they do have their predators that help to knock them back down to the point where it's like, where'd they all go? They were everywhere last year.
Interesting. Elizabeth McManus shared that she caught a Cyanothus silk moth with a mercury vapor trap.
Last night I saw. Last night?
Yeah.
That's great. So where? Liz, where are you? That's what I want to know. Because that's an early date.
Maybe she'll put it in the chat.
Okay.
Kathleen Riley asked, and I think she might be joking a little bit, and I missed this particular moth, but she wants to know if Alpia langtoni is also called the police car moth.
It is not. So that's a different species of moth that I did not include, but they do live in the same habitat. I often find them together. And maybe I should have included that caterpillar, but I often see the adults way more than I see the caterpillars. Hence why I didn't include it in the commonly encountered caterpillars. But it is a different moth. It's actually a tiger moth, so more related to the woolly bears than to the langtoni. But the larvae are just gorgeous. They're red, blue, and yellow, and so probably toxic, just like the other tiger moth caterpillars. And they feed on bluebells. So actually, I hate the name police car moth. And so in my guide, I call it the bluebell tiger moth.
Okay, thank you. An anonymous person asked if the caterpillars that you can't find the host for, could it be because they're generalists and not specialists?
I mean, it could be, but the problem is that we know the hosts of plenty of generalists. There are lots of moths that are generalists that we find on numerous trees and shrubs or numerous herbaceous plants, and we have found them and documented their hosts. So it's one of those things like, why are we not finding these other ones?
Interesting, frustrating. Virginia Link, I think I'm mispronouncing her name, says she has cutworms on her primroses, but she doesn't stay up at night to see the moths. But she also asked, why would we kill moths? Aren't they pollinating at night?
Yes, they are. So wait, did I say something about killing moths?
I don't know if people maybe think that when you trap them, they die.
Oh, when I trap them. So when I trap them, so in the bucket trap, what I'll do is put a whole bunch of egg crates at the bottom, like egg cartons at the bottom, and it just gives them a nice little place to rest. Now, if you're an entomologist, if you're with like a department that's doing a study, then you might put a killing agent in there. I don't. I'm just looking to photograph them, enjoy them. So I'll open up and they're all still living. The big white sheet is basically just a big old landing pad they land on. And then there was the one I showed of the bug zapper that Carl Barrington uses, but like I said, he's disabled the zap out of that. So now it's just a bright glowing light for them. But people do think of moths as pests, and some of them may be pests depending on what you're growing. Like if you're a tomato grower, you hate tomato hornworms. But yes, they are very good pollinators. And jumping onto that, Cheryl sent me a direct message saying, are moths better pollinators than butterflies? And yes, largely that's because there's more of them than there are butterflies. And the fact that moths tend to be way more fuzzy than butterflies for their nighttime flight to hold in heat also coincidentally helps to pick up more pollen. So it's not like they're really benefiting from it. They're benefiting from the little fur coat they're wearing, but that also helps to spread pollen from plant to plant. So moths are definitely better pollinators than butterflies. Not as good as bees. Bees are number one, but moths not far behind.
Okay. Robert Peelant of the Pacific Rim Institute was wondering if the gut contents of caterpillars can be analyzed to see what they eat, kind of like in a murder mystery.
Yeah, I saw that. The challenge there is we need to find the caterpillar. And then, because it's one of those things where it's like we find a caterpillar, and I'm sure you could do that. But as far as the unknown moths, you would need to find the caterpillar, raise it. Hopefully you'd find the plant that it was on, raise it, and then it would have to turn into a moth that you'd go, that's the one, that's one of them we don't know. But oh yeah, I imagine there's methods that for any caterpillar you find, you can determine the host, but then the problem becomes, you know, I don't know quite how that works, if we would have to sacrifice the caterpillar to get those gut contents, or if you can somehow get it to, you know, regurgitate its meal. Not quite sure how that would work.
I see the problem. Here's a funny one. When my partner and I lived in Japan, they had an encounter with pine processionary caterpillars, the one with the irritating hairs. And we were told that they were able to shoot the hairs out at potential assailants even after they die. So is the porcupine caterpillar. Have you heard of such a thing?
I have.
Caterpillars with irritating spines deploy them.
I have never heard of it. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist. I know nothing about Japanese Lepidoptera, so it could very well exist.
Interesting. Here's a question. How did you get interested in moths?
The boring answer is because I was interested in butterflies. And so
and then you saw the light.
No, so basically because I was into butterflies, therefore I got into the day flying moths, which there's just as many moths that fly during the day as there are butterflies. And then that led to, okay, well now I know these moths, and then I wanted to know more about the other moths, and that kind of led down that hole. So, you know, I study butterflies just as much as moths. Birds keep me sane in the winter. I know I'm speaking to a native plant group, and I have to say, if a butterfly doesn't use it, I don't know it.
Interesting.
I'm trying to learn more of my native plants. Yes.
It's a wonderful world, the world of native plants. So Vaughn Johnson wants to know what moths do to survive the winter.
So just as varied as every other bit of their life cycle. So some burrow into the ground. You'll have moths that will spend the winter as eggs, some as caterpillars, some as pupa. You have a number that spend the winter as adults. But one of the big keys is that they basically have an alcohol in their system. I think it's glycerol is the there's different ones, but I think glycerol is the major one. But basically it lowers the freezing point of the insect's blood. And I think that's the main strategy that most insects employ to survive the winter. So they have below freezing blood, basically.
Interesting, like antifreeze.
Yeah, something like that. Like I said, I think glycerol is the major alcohol compound that insects use, but I know there's others.
Okay, I'm looking back in the chat now. What are some invasive species of moths or butterflies that hurt our native plants?
Let's see, what are some invasive species? I'm trying to think of any that like really, so we have some invasive species that are a headache for, you know, a headache for gardeners, a headache for people who store food. I'm trying to think of any native plants that are at risk from invasive moths. I can't think of any off the top of my head, but I'm fairly certain there probably is one or two. But with 3,000 species of moths, I don't know. It's kind of hard to remember. The big,
Okay,
the,
well,
the,
here's
the
a
big one,
topic.
the big one we don't want in is the gypsy moth. So if you've ever been driving around, you see those long triangular tubes attached to the trees. That's the Washington Department of Fish and Washington Department of Agriculture, and they're setting those out as gypsy moth traps to try to detect early establishment and get rid of them if they do detect a colony, an introduction. And they have found gypsy moths in Washington every year for the past 25 years, and every year they've eliminated them. So it's actually a governmental agency that deserves a standing ovation, in my opinion.
Interesting. So here's something that you touched on briefly earlier, I think, before we went live. Beth Bama or Ben Bama, when moths are attracted to outdoor house lights and then perceived to hang out for several days, is their breeding cycle interrupted, especially for the moths that live only a few number of days. I occasionally have this happen with Sphinx moths and worry they're not finding a mate.
Yes, so I think you and I talked about this a little bit before the presentation. Light pollution, especially in urban and suburban areas, is a big problem for several species of moths. Not all of them. If you're an already common moth, then lights kind of serve as like a singles bar kind of thing. You both arrive there, and it serves as a meeting place. But if you're one of the let's say the big old silk moths, they're at naturally low densities. And when you only live for a few days, that one night you spend at a light is costly. So light pollution has had a detrimental impact to specifically silk moths, probably many others in urban areas. But the good news is that they're all still fairly widespread. I still find them whenever I trap, out on Forest Service roads. So as soon as you get out of the suburban areas, they're there. And I still find them occasionally in my suburban yard. But yeah, they do have, light pollution is a big detrimental effect.
Okay, and then Rob Stevens asks, do moths have a chrysalis stage similar to butterflies?
So yes, and so basically the difference between a chrysalis and a cocoon, both butterflies and moths make a chrysalis. It's basically when the final stage caterpillar sheds its skin and out comes a chrysalis. But most moths, not all of them, but most moths take that extra step to make the cocoon, which is the protective layer around the chrysalis, whereas butterflies don't do that.
Okay. Robert Peelant also asks, to get a sense of the range of species we might have, and considering their short adult lifespan, how often should we trap?
So it depends on like the intensity of the trap you want to use. Do you want to use a bucket trap, mercury vapor, just like a UV bulb, like incandescent bulb or something like that? I generally aim for like two to 3 nights a week. Someone like Carl Barentine runs lights very often because he's trying to get a big collective idea of what's there. And you'll have some rare species that you might not get if you only run it as infrequently as I do. So it kind of depends on what you're going for. For me, it's mostly fun. getting a species list for my backyard. So I generally do 2 to 3 nights a week, trying to leave some nights for them to go do their moth thing.
Great. Roxy Giddings shares that starlings eat tent caterpillars.
I saw that. I'm gonna have to look into that because I was not aware of that.
Oh, and I was also curious about the previous question because I'm from California. In California, my mother's wool sweaters are full of moth holes, but I don't have the problem here in Washington. Do we not have those kinds of moths here?
So we do have a number of moths that they're small moths and they do eat cotton. Cotton's a plant. Cotton, wool. They're the kind of moths that are like the detritivores that will just take organic material and eat it. I had a problem with one in my slacks. That was fun. They don't seem to be as common up here, but that being said, they do exist here. But they do seem to do much better in warmer climates. So that would be my initial explanation. Warmer climate in California, probably better for them.
Got it.
But I definitely had a pair of slacks of mine eaten by them.
Is it the moths that eat them or the caterpillars?
It's the caterpillars, not the moth.
So once we see a moth, it's too late.
Well, no. If you want to get rid of it, remember the moth is going to make more caterpillars.
True. Janet Wall says, I found 3 dead police car moths on a Tansy Ragwort flower. Could they have been poisoned by the nectar?
I don't think so because Tansy Ragwort is visited by a number of different pollinators, and it wouldn't really do the plant much good to poison their pollinators. If you look in there, you might find maybe a crab spider hidden in there. That's a possibility.
Interesting. Shelley Evans says, I remember encountering the larva of a plume moth that was foraging on Castanea vivisecta. Any comments about plume moths?
They're really cool and really hard to identify. We probably have a number of species that have yet to be named because a lot of them look alike. That being said, we probably have 3 or 4 that are easily identified. So for those who don't know, plume moths, basically they're super thin-winged forewing, and then their hind wing is actually divided into lobes that look like little plumes. Does not really make you envy flight, to be honest, but they tend to be borers into various herbaceous plants, and they also kind of their chrysalis looks like a little swallowtail chrysalis. It's actually very pretty. But plume moths, very, very interesting, and I do not know enough about them. Oh, there's a woman. Is it Deborah? Oh, there's a woman who's an absolute genius with these. She studies them, and she is the national expert on plume moths.
Okay, because Shelley continues that the plume moths were eating the flowers, and since
Yes.
Castanea vivisecta is a sensitive species, there is potentially issue of concern.
Potentially, it could be. I'd be really interested in. I'd have to find out this woman's name, but contacting them and seeing if could this be a specialist species on Levisecta, or could this be a plume moth that just, hey, any Castanea will do?
Right.
Like, could we be looking at, because a lot of plume moths look alike, and so just by looking at a photo, it's often not good enough. And you'd have to dissect it or send it in for DNA or something like that. So it'd be really interesting. Like maybe Levisecta has its own unique herbivore. I don't know. Just a guess.
Okay. Ellen Robinson asks, I live in one of the most densely populated, least green parts of Seattle. Can I still study my neighborhood moths?
Oh, yes, it's just going to be a little bit trickier. You're going to have a lot of competition with the lights and stuff like that. Let's see. Basically, I'd try different forms of black lights. That would be probably the best. BioQuip has some. You're not going to get as many simply because you are so urban, but you'll get some. And then if you have any yard to speak of, or if you want to do some like guerrilla planting of seeds along maybe like a median strip, you might be able to get some more moths coming into the area that way by planting a more diversity of host plants.
Which would be great to do with native plants anyway.
Yep.
Christina Lefebvre asks, what do you think about farmers using spinosad? SPINOSAD.
I know nothing of that, unfortunately.
Okay.
So I apologize. I'm not familiar with that topic.
Does replacing outdoor light bulbs with yellow LEDs protect moths?
There's been some research in this, and I am not up to date with it, and mostly that's because I'm in the business of attracting moths to me, and so if there's a light that does not attract them, I have no interest in it. So it would be good for me to look that up to answer questions like this, because I'm sure it's not the last time I'm going to get it, but I am not up to date with those lights.
Because Frania Bryant has the same question or whether it's better to leave porch lights off, because it was actually Doug Tallamy that suggested that yellowish LED lights were better to use for the safety of moths.
Mm-hmm.
So there's going to be a massive switch over here in Seattle.
And it's not just moths either. A number of night flying insects, same thing. There actually is some evidence to suggest that they're learning how to avoid our lights, which would make sense. If you're sacrificing your reproductive potential by hanging out with a light, then it would make sense that natural selection would then favor moths or favor insects that know how to discern natural light from artificial light and avoid it. And so there's actually some evidence, I can find the paper if someone's interested, but there's some evidence to suggest that they're actually learning how to avoid it.
Great. This is a long question. Earlier you mentioned that many moths have genus names or family names. Plant people are definitely going through a lot of name changes with more DNA sequencing. A lot of plant taxonomy is based on the flower's characteristics. Is there a major moth characteristic that names are based on?
There's a lot of moths named after their caterpillars. I wouldn't say any particularly unifying trait across all those moths. Across the 160,000 species of moths, I can't say there's really very many unifying characteristics. Within a family, sure. You got your hummingbirds, Sphinx moths, hawk moths. Trying to think of others. You have your woolly bears. But not one or two major moth characteristics that the names are based on.
Okay, well, I think that's about all the questions I see for now.
Okay.
Lots of awesomes and thank yous.
I see Vaughn Johnson asked send the paper or send the source, whatever I can find. How would I get that to people who are interested?
Good question. You can send it to me.
Okay.
My email is info@wnps.org. And if people are interested in that, they can also ask me to send it along. So
Okay.
again, my email, I'll put it in the chat. My email is info@wnps.org. And I see we have 4 new questions. So let me stop typing and get to those.
I see someone's educating me on spinosad and gave me a link to that. so someone corrected my pronunciation of Willamette. Okay.
Good. I didn't catch it when you mispronounced it. Okay, there's the spinosad thing. Interesting. Have to read that more carefully. So another thank you. Is our silk moth the same as the one in the Far East used to make silk?
No. So it's in a related family to our silk moths. Vast majority of our moths make silk, but the ones that make silk of a high enough grade for silk production, that's in the Bombacidae. It's a related family to the Saturnidae, which is our big silk moths.
Thank you. So I think the ones in the Q&A are repeats of the information about spinosad. I'm
Okay.
still not sure I'm pronouncing that right. So I think we've answered pretty much everybody's questions, and it remains for me to thank you as well.
All right. This was fun. So yeah, leave a porch light on. Take a picture, submit it to Butterflies and Moths of North America. Start contributing.
Sounds like fun. I'm gonna go check out my porch light as soon as we're done here.
Raise some caterpillars too. It's fun. I mean, I'm not very good at it, but. All right. Well, everyone have a wonderful evening. Spring's here. It's going to be a great year.
Right. Thank you very much, David.
Good night.
Good night.